Levy Flights and Walks by Ted Lewis. Levy flights and walks are paths taken by animals and humans that qualify for the Casinos of Extremistan because they obey power laws. In this lecture, I use the spread of SARS and terrorism to illustrate levy flights and walks, and show that epidemics and terrorism obey power laws, just like any other normal accident of Extremistan. In this lecture, I make several surprising claims. For example, I claim that terrorism is destined to die out because of the shape of its power law. Here are the topics covered. First, I trace the origin and path followed by the SARS epidemic, which many feared would become a global pandemic. But it didn't. Instead, SARS was a flash in the pan. It flared up, quickly spread to 29 countries, and just as quickly died out. Why? I claim that SARS obeyed a levy walk in both time and space. That is, the spread of SARS jumped from country to country according to power laws that described both the distances and times between incidents of the disease. Thus, it qualifies as a normal accident in Extremistan. The concept of a levy walk is illustrated by foraging termites and human shoppers. As it turns out, termites and humans are a lot like SARS. We all hop, skip, and jump from place to place according to a power law. Next, I make a surprising claim. Terrorism is a lot like SARS. It spreads around the globe like an attenuated epidemic in both time and space. In fact, I will make a prediction of where and when the next terrorist attack will take place. If we want to understand global epidemics and pandemics, we need to understand levy flights. To understand levy flights, we need to understand the foraging behavior of animals and humans, and this includes terrorists. Finally, what does levy flight theory have to do with homeland security, public health, and natural disasters? What are the policy implications? The first victim of SARS was a family in Fushan Province, China, that contracted the virus after consuming a homemade meal of stir-fried vegetables, chicken, snake, and civet. A civet is a kind of domestic cat found in China. Apparently, civets manufactured the SARS virus by mutating something caught from humans and returning it to humans via the meal consumed by the family of 6 in the fall of 2002. The first victims of SARS were dead within a few days following their dinner. SARS quickly spread to 29 countries over a very brief 9-month period. The Metropole Hotel in Kowloon, Hong Kong became a hub of the global network. Outbreaks in other countries, and especially Canada, can be traced back to a small group of people that stayed in the Metropole in November. In fact, many of the contaminated people were exposed while waiting for the same elevator on the 9th floor of the Metropole. Overall, the disease infected 8,422 and killed 916 people in 9 months. It spread like wildfire and just as quickly died out. The question we ask here is, why did it come and go so quickly? SARS established a social network shown here by nodes and links representing the countries where infections were recorded and the path the virus took to get from one country to another. I also recorded the distance between countries, as well as the dates the incidents occurred. My goal was to identify patterns in the trail of destruction left behind by the disease. Clearly, traditional methods of analysis apply here. The number of infected people started out small, rapidly increased to a maximum value, and then died out. But I am interested in a different analysis. I want to determine if there is any pattern in the distances between outbreaks. Secondly, I want to understand why the contagion suddenly stopped in its tracks. Therefore, I recorded the distances as shown here, and assumed the links accurately represent the source of each contagion as it spread from node to node in the social network. My assumption could be wrong, but based on the distances and links, I discovered that SARS jumped from one place to another along a path described by a levy flight. What is a levy flight? A levy flight or walk is a random walk that obeys a power law. That is, the distances between waypoints are described by our old friend, the power law. Most jumps are short, a few are of medium size, and even fewer are very rare and long jumps. If you plot these jumps as an exceedance probability, the curve is a very nice power law, as shown here. Levy flights were named after Paul Pierre Levy, 1885 to 1971, who first studied them. Levy was a French mathematician and educator who observed that seemingly random walks in nature followed a power law instead of the normal or bell curve distribution. Because Levy walks are uneven displacements in space, we say they are bursty. That is, the SARS virus traveled small distances most of the time, but once in a while it jumped a long distance. The power law shown here plots probability versus jump distance measured in miles. Using my rough calculations, and assuming the order of outbreaks also defines where the virus came from, I discovered that SARS obeyed a power law as shown here, with an exponent of 1.6. The likelihood of jumping a long distance quickly drops off, so most of the jumps are relatively short. Nonetheless, the diffusion of SARS fits this power law rather nicely. Please remember the number 1.6, because you will see it again. To understand levy walks and flights, consider a tribe of artificial termites that forage for chips as follows. A single termite randomly walks around an area, as shown here. Of course, the red dots are wood chips, and the black lines trace out the termite's path. But in this experiment, the termite only visits a chip once, and links the previously visited chip with the next chip it encounters at random. The chip turns black as soon as it is linked, and the termite ignores it and all other black chips forever after. The snapshot on the left shows the path traversed by the termite as it visits red chips, links them, and changes them into black chips. The termite must get around the barriers shown here to reach all chips. Remember that a link is only inserted between pairs of chips when one of the chips is red. Black chips are ignored, even if they are encountered a second time. The snapshot in the center shows progress, and the snapshot at the right shows the result of bumping into nearly all chips. Notice that some links are short, others are long, and still others are in between. If we plot the lengths of the links on an exceedance probability curve, the curve will fit an L-shaped power law. That is, the termite walks a levy walk in space as it forages. The length of links does not follow a bell curve as expected, but rather a lopsided power law. Laszlo Barabasi claims levy walk behavior in humans is the result of people keeping to-do lists in their heads and constantly reprioritizing the order in which they do them. This may be so, but I think the foraging termite experiment is a better explanation. As the SARS virus randomly walked through China and the rest of Asia, it behaved like a foraging termite. Previously infected or encountered victims were passed over because they were either already infected or immune. So the SARS virus moved on. The length of distances traversed between new outbreaks followed a power law, just like our artificial termites. Levy flights have been observed in animals and human shoppers alike. Apparently, shoppers are about as complex as termites when it comes to foraging. Levy walks are not all that rare. Here is a short list of other systems that also follow power laws in space and time. Airline routes and seabirds both fly levy flights. Dripping faucets follow power laws in time. The interval between drops obeys a power law. Money, beating hearts, ants, bees, sheep, deer, monkeys, and people obey Levy's theory of displacement in both time and space. Could it be that the SARS virus foraged like a termite? Do viruses shop around like humans? Do humans move through time and space like foraging termites? I think so. Hank Eskin didn't know what a levy flight was when he started an interesting experiment in 1997. He wanted to find out where money went as it circulated throughout the economy, so he set up a website called where'sgeorge.com, shown here as a simple data entry form to be filled out by volunteers. Here is how it works. Look at the dollar bills in your pocket. If one has www.where'sgeorge.com written on it, go to the website and fill out the form as shown here. Eskin's site will track the dollar via its serial number and zip code. In this way, Hank can track the path traveled by each bill. Eskin makes no money from this social network. He did it on a lark. But two serious scientists found an important use for the frivolous website. Dirk Brockman and Lars Hufnagel became interested in Eskin's website while studying Levy flights of people and things, especially contagious viruses. They postulated that diseases spread like money, so they analyzed nearly 500,000 bills tracked by Eskin as a proxy for contagions. Their theory was that diseases travel with people just as viruses do. Their results were a big surprise. Sure enough, the paths followed by dollar bills obey a power law. That is, the distances that individual bills traveled follow the same pattern as the length of termite trips between wood chips. Brockman and Hufnagel obtained a power law exponent of 1.6, exactly the same as the power law I obtained for the spread of SARS. Apparently, money and diseases have something in common. They move through space according to the same power law. This result is contrary to the prevailing theory of epidemiology, which assumes uniform mixing of people, money, termites, etc., as these things move in space and time. But in the real world, things do not uniformly mix. Instead, they are governed by complex networks, social networks that establish a different order. This order is determined by the topology of the network, and as we have seen many times before, the network is not random. Rather, it has a shape. Now, let us return to the burning question. Why did SARS die out? Why did it not spread to every country in the world and contaminate millions of people? What held it back? After all, modern air travel has a tendency to carry people and their contagions everywhere. In fact, public health officials say that a typical virus can encircle the globe in 6 days or less. Yanqing Hu and colleagues at Beijing Normal University constructed a network model of epidemics much like the one I showed earlier, but with one important difference. They added weights to the links of their networks. These weights represented the energy drain on the virus due to distance traveled. In other words, Hu assumed that the virulence of the virus consumes a kind of energy. Longer trips take more energy, and thus virulence decreases with distance. According to this model, if the social network that spread the virus contains more long-distance links than short-distance links, the epidemic will die out. In fact, the epidemic spreads fastest if the power law exponent is equal to 2. But if it is less than 2, say 1.6, the disease will die out. If we believe Hu's model, then SARS died out because it spread along links that were too long. Specifically, the social network shown at the beginning of this discussion contained too many long links as compared to short links. SARS dies out because 1.6 is less than 2. This theory has not been confirmed by other researchers, but it is perhaps the best current explanation for why SARS was a short-lived epidemic rather than a pandemic. So we have the basis of a new theory of epidemics. First, epidemics are transmitted by social networks that have a non-random shape. The shape of this social network determines the contagion's course. Second, epidemics take Levy walks rather than purely random walks. The shape of the social network determines the exponent of the Levy walk power law. Finally, the power law exponent determines the fate of the virus. If the exponent is less than 2, the virus dies out. So now we can trace the evolution of a mutant disease like SARS from social network topology to its persistence of attenuation, because the topology of a network determines the exponent of the power law, an impressive result. SARS was an example of an attenuated epidemic because it died out. I claim that terrorism is also an attenuated epidemic that will eventually die out. How can I make this claim? I analyzed global terrorism attacks and found that they are Levy flights in space with an exponent of 1.6. The exceedance probability for deaths caused by terrorism obeys a power law with an exponent of 1.2, and the elapsed time in months between subsequent attacks obeys a power law with an exponent of 1.25. Using these exponents and setting the probabilities at 50%, I get the following result. With probability of 50%, the next terrorist attack will occur within 3,000 miles of the previous one, 87 days afterwards, and kill 26 people. While not very exacting, this prediction is better than most intel analysts can come up with. But the most interesting conjecture is this. Terrorism should eventually die out because the exponent of its Levy flight power law is less than 2. Of course, this assumes that terrorism is an epidemic, as modeled by Hu and his colleagues at the Beijing Normal University. How does Levy flight and walk theory help us understand epidemics, and especially the impact of public health on homeland security? Here are a few observations that tie epidemic theory to Bach's sandpile. SARS emerged out of nowhere. More generally, epidemics are a result of emergence, just like many other natural catastrophes. Biologically, this means mutations will continue to create new diseases of unexpected impact in the future. We can only hope that they die out like SARS did, but this is unlikely. Modern epidemics like SARS and H1N1 can be understood in terms of self-organized criticality, SOC. Small incidents, such as a family of 6 sitting down to a dinner of chicken, snake, and civet, can lead to global outbreaks or normal accidents. These accidents are punctuated, most are insignificant, but a rare few are black swans. They are also unexpected. The coincidental meeting of people at an elevator in Hong Kong normally would not lead to a global epidemic. But when the tipping point of a complex system is reached, a small coincidence can start the domino effect of a normal accident. These accidents cannot be predicted, but we can model them as Levy flights and walks. In other words, epidemics are normal accidents in the Casinos of Extremistan. These conclusions should not be a surprise, because biological black swans have happened before. Luckily, the Levy walk power law has an extremely long tail when it comes to biological calamities. Humans have survived many extinctions and near extinctions. Nearly all of the species that have lived on Earth have already gone extinct. We know of only a few of these black swans. The Cretaceous Tertiary Extinction Event, or KT event, that is thought to have taken out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago was the most recent black swan. Going back further, geologists think extinctions and near extinctions have occurred 210, 250, 395, and 440 million years ago. Natural catastrophes are apparently natural. In today's modern world of city living, global travel, and rapidly mutating viruses, self-organized criticality builds up in internet time. Don't expect the next black swan to take 65 million years. What are the policy implications of epidemics, Levy flights, power laws, and constantly mutating diseases? From a purely mathematical point of view, the way to reduce self-organized criticality in the human population is to lower the spectral radius of the human social network. This means fewer links, lower population or less contact, and fewer hubs, less congestion and contact. It is unlikely that humans will comply because we are a gregarious species. We like to concentrate in cities and associate with others. Even without civet for dinner, humans are constantly exposed because of our proximity to one another. Reducing spectral radius is impractical. A second approach is more practical, but still not likely to be implemented. This involves establishing global bioshields through a number of mechanisms. Medical intelligence that gives early warnings of outbreaks is one mechanism. This might involve collecting data from hospitals and clinics from around the world in real time. It might also involve tracking the rate of consumption of over-the-counter drugs. Spikes in the purchase of certain drugs might predict the outbreak of more serious illnesses. A more aggressive policy of checking travelers for various diseases upon border crossings might reduce the spread of diseases via air travel. But this has privacy issues. Using a variety of non-intrusive and automated sensing technologies, this mechanism would inspect every person crossing a border. Quarantines work. SARS died out much quicker in China than Canada because China isolated the infected region, and Canada did not. But of course, a quarantine that restricts the movement of people is extremely difficult to achieve in open societies. Quarantines are essentially a form of network therapy that reduces link density or isolates hubs. Regardless of implementation difficulties, quarantines are perhaps the most effective deterrent to the spread of mutant viruses that have no cure. When things get really desperate, governments will turn to quarantine, regardless of personal freedoms.